Story continued from Utahraptor playlist. The dry season has dragged on for months now, and along with the lack of rain has come a series of fires. Small fires are common in this region, and with the slow winds they rarely get above ground level. Many animals have adapted to either be able to hide from the flames or avoid them completely. The smell of smoke carries much further and faster, giving those in its path plenty of warning. But not all species can get up and move, especially if they have nests to guard. This is the risk Utahraptor take every time the breeding season comes around. A fire could wipe out an entire clan's yearly clutch if they are unlucky. Because of this, many packs have specific areas in their territory they use that are at lower risk of being engulfed in an inferno, used generation after generation. The blades are no different, and when the females need to make their nests, they gather on a rocky outcrop looking over a section of forest. There is a plant-free space 20 meters away from the hill, where the vegetation begins again. Fires have swept through here before, but never a large one, and the flat rock means it's very hard for egg thieves to approach without being seen. Here, the females of the blades that have fallen pregnant this year have laid their eggs, and brood over them of nests made from sticks and leaves. 4 have reproduced this year: the alpha, Sickle, her sister, Executioner, Falcon, the second in command, and her sister, Cutlass. A small fire is slowly making its way through the nearby shrub, but the direction of the wind means the flames will not get close to the nesting site, though some of the smoke is blowing over the females. At this point, the smell is more of a problem than the smoke itself, though if the intensity of the blaze increases or the wind changes, they could be at risk of smoke inhalation. They are not alone, however. 2 males guard them: Cutlass's mate, Conda, and Falcon's mate, Strider. The rest of the pack is out hunting or patrolling, with food still being difficult to find and other packs encroaching on their territory. It is all hands on deck. The young were kept away from the mothers at the bottom of the outcrop, guarded by 2 of the pack's newest males. The protective females don't want energetic youngsters running around them all the time, but for them their biggest worry was their fellow adults. Though rare, it was not unheard of for female Utahraptor to destroy the eggs of other females in order to give their own offspring a better chance at survival. Less mouths to feed and such. Females in a clan were usually all related, so infanticide was less likely, but never an impossibility. So they kept one eye open for threats from without, and the other open for threats from within. Strider looked over the restless females and shook his head as an ember sizzled across the feathers on his neck. He felt less anxious being here with Falcon, though even he could feel the thin layer of tension hovering over the outcrop that had nothing to do with the flames drawing ever closer. From the tree line, he could see 2 potential threats to his and Falcon's eggs. A duo of Gemini Raptor peeked their heads over the ferns every once in a while, keeping far away from the large dromaeosaurs, watching them every day or so to try and spot a weakness in their defenses. Instead of disappearing into the underbrush like usual, they were chased off by a different raptor. The old male Utahraptor chased the little troodonts away, and then looked over his much larger relatives. Strider eyed him. This species also raided nests, but for the elderly male, those days were behind him. He looked over the gathering group of Utahs, locking eyes with Strider, the 2 predators seeming to almost recognize each other. Strider heard a snorting coming from the forest edge, and looked over to see Conda making his way out of the brush, shaking his head and expelling air from his nose, likely to clear some ash or smoke from it. He looked back, and the Utahraptor was gone, almost as if it had vanished into thin air. Strider was somewhat perplexed by this disappearance when he heard Conda let out a choking yelp. The females heard it too, and all eyes looked to the male Utah's location. Conda had seemingly fallen to the ground, but then he slid backwards. Something was pulling him by his tail. The near half-ton carnivore was dragged backwards, his form swallowed by the thick foliage. A scream was heard, followed by a low thud as he was seemingly thrown against a tree. Then there was silence. Cutlass rose to her feet from seeing her mate in peril, but did not move from the nest, her instinct to help her partner conflicting with the need to protect her eggs. Strider barked twice to single Conda, but no response came. What could have overpowered a full-grown Utahraptor like that? The trees and ferns barely moved, but something large was in there, eyeing the dromaeosaurs with disdain. From between the trees, the tip of a long snout appeared, over 3 meters off the ground. The rest of the triangular skull cut through the leaves, and behind it came the lean yet powerful body of a near 11-meter-long theropod. The blood in Strider's body went ice cold, and he took 2 involuntary steps back, as the only predator Utahraptors feared came into the smoky clearing. The Cedar Dragon stood before the Blades Pack members and hissed menacingly, revealing its thin, blade-like teeth. This is an early Carcharodontosaur, but he is one of the largest predators on the planet, weighing just under 5 tons, nearly 10 times even the largest Utahraptor. Strider had seen these giants only a handful of times before. Whenever they got close, his species' response was to just leave the area, often simply to abandon a kill. But this time was different. Whether made to come this way by the fire or simply coming across them, the dragon had located his next meal. He could and had fed on Utahraptor in the past, but what was more appealing was the eggs they guarded. Even massive theropods knew how nutritious they were. He stomped towards the egg site. He didn't have to fight the raptors, he just had to intimidate one after another to get the mothers to back away from their eggs. The females lifted their tails, spread out the feathers on their arms, and screeched in anger. An intimidation tactic, but one that did not work on such a threat. The Carcharodontosaur kept moving forward. Strider barked weakly as a primal terror welled up within him. The terror of suddenly realizing you were no longer the predator, but the prey. He was not in the attacker's path, and so the dragon ignored him, marching towards the closest female, Falcon. Strider could see this, but was almost frozen in fear, having never been so close to one of these creatures before. His eyes darted between the dragon and his mate. Falcon continued to howl at the huge intruder, but even she was succumbing to terror, and lifted her body off the nest, revealing their helpless eggs. Strider's breaths came in rapid and sharp, panic setting in, but the sight of the dragon over his mate and their unhatched offspring finally made him act. He instinctively ran forward, heart pounding in his chest. He closed the distance between himself and the 5-ton monster, then leapt up at its rear. He wrapped his arms around its tail and bit into the hide, dangling in the air, his tail sweeping the ground. The dragon looked around, seeing the Utahraptor kicking its legs and drawing blood as it bit. In response, it lifted its tail and then crashed it into the ground. Strider was smacked flat, losing his grip. He was slightly dazed, but then saw the giant was lifting its tail again to slam against him. Strider tugged in his legs and jumped sideways as the thick tail pounded the rock face where he lay a fraction of a second before, sending the smoke out in all directions. The dragon turned and opened its jaws to snap at him. Strider sidestepped again and launched himself upwards at the Carcharodont's leg. The claws on his fingers and toes gripped the thick muscle of the carnivore, but it was the sickle claw on his second toe that gained him purchase, and he secured himself to the monster's side. He bit again, cutting through scales and flesh. This time, the massive predator roared in pain. It jerked its head around and clamped the edge of its long skull over the Utahraptor's back. Strider howled as searing agony erupted through his body, and he was pulled off the dragon's back and thrown through the air. With a mighty crack, he impacted a rock, fell to the ground, and let out a choked cough. Strider had been bucked off large prey like sauropods before, and though this wasn't the worst blunt force injury he had ever received, it had fractured multiple bones and nearly knocked him out cold. Strider struggled to stand. He could feel the footsteps of the dragon coming closer, looking over him to see if he still posed a threat. He tried to rise, but couldn't even see straight, let alone get to his feet. The dragon saw the male dromaeosaurs being dealt with, and turned back to face the females, still crouching over their nests and crying out, unwilling to fight together. Instinct telling them to stay where they were, and leave it to the males to defend them, even though both were now utterly overpowered. Strider rose weakly on shaky legs, half his body hurt, and he was bleeding from his back. He tried to draw in air, but his strength wouldn't return. He looked forward and saw the dragon closing in on Falkion once again. Her head kept darting between the predator to her front and Strider to her side. He saw terror and helplessness in her remaining eye, unlike anything that had come before, because she wasn't just afraid for her own life, but for their offspring as well. The fire had drawn closer, and the embers blew over the scene as the dragon lifted up and roared at Falkion, causing her to fall backwards, kicking her legs in fright as the other females went silent. Strider looked over to Falkion, his eyes locking with hers. In that moment, she knew what he was about to do. "Goodbye," he whispered, and Falkion's breath caught in her throat. Strider, wounded and breathless, ran straight at the dragon, immediately getting its attention. He opened up his arms and roared as loudly as he could, a pained howl of rage and defiance. He bent his legs and threw himself into the air, knowing he couldn't hold anything back, as this would be his last act for his clan, his promised, and for his children. The dragon pulled its head to the side and then swung it into Strider's airborne body with catastrophic force. It was the hardest Strider had been hit in his entire life. His body flew backwards and impacted the same rock with a sickening crunch of bone. He flopped to the ground in a broken heap and did not move. The giant predator snorted and shook its long head. That Utahraptor would never bother him again. Falkion looked to Strider. She needed him to get up. She searched for any sign of movement. Only his feathers fluttered in the slow wind, ash settling over his form. Her fear was banished in an instant, and in its place was left only the need to kill. Falkion screamed so loud even the Carcharodontosaur flinched, and in that moment she jumped up onto its side and hauled herself onto its back. She slashed her killing claw across its hide, putting all her strength into her kicks. The larger hunter tried to reach back with its head to pry her off, when 3 more cries rang out, and the beast was shocked to see all the other females charging, glaring viciously at him with teeth exposed. The Utahraptor tackled the dragon from the side, with so much force hitting him, and Falkion pulling him backwards. The massive predator fell to the ground with a crash. He cried out as multiple ribs broke or fractured. The enraged raptors were all over him. They bit and clawed at his tail, legs, and back. Too many, even for him to fend off. They had lost their fear of him, and so he had lost any advantage he had. Thrashing around, he could have fought on, but as teeth and talons tore wounds and flesh was pulled from his body, the dragon rolled to his feet and stood up, immediately making for the forest in a retreat. Falkion hung from his tail, and the other Utahraptors slashed at his legs, chasing the monster away. It wasn't until he reached the tree line they stopped their attack. Still hissing and barking, they watched as the Cedar Dragon limped back towards the burning section of forest, his blood leaving a crimson trail in his wake. The females of the blades breathed deeply, their killing instinct not yet sated. But Falcon turned around and ran to the cluster of rocks where Strider had been struck down. She skidded to a halt in front of Strider's prone and flat form, rasping breaths escaping her mouth. She pressed the edge of her jaws against his neck to rouse him, but he did not move. Eye wide, she cooed softly, a sound meant to comfort, but the stress and desperation were clear in its rapid tone. Strider did not move, and Falcon blurted out a pained cry as she lay next to him. Sickle, Executioner, and Cutlass gathered around her, sharing in the grief their packmate was going through, but unable to console her. Falcon lay her head on Strider's chest and gave one final exhausted moan before going silent. The crackle of burning leaves and the soft wind, the only sound on the outcrop. Only then did she notice Strider's chest was moving. He was still breathing. Falcon moved in front of him and chirped loudly, beckoning him to awaken. Slowly, Strider's eyes opened a fraction, and he exhaled deeply. He had multiple broken ribs, fingers, and even vertebra, but fortunately, none were paralyzing. He was badly wounded, but alive. Falcon rubbed her head along Strider's own. She thought she had lost him, and let out a few weak wails till Strider rumbled to let her know he wasn't going anywhere. A grunt followed by parting ferns made the other females turn their heads around. Out of the forest stumbled Conda. He was concussed and only recently come back to consciousness. Cutlass sprinted over to him and the two embraced, running their heads over each other's shoulders and cooing quietly. Sickle and Executioner spread out to make sure the area was safe and nothing got close to the nests. The females were calmed, though shaken. Falcon wanted to stay with Strider longer, but had to brood over her eggs, so reluctantly returned to shelter and warm them. It took hours for Strider to stand, and when he did, he limped over to Falcon and basically collapsed by her side. As he tucked in close to her, she lay her head and neck over his body. She could tell he was hurting and would need a long time to recover. But just as he looked after her when she lost her eye, she would look after him till he was well enough again. Together, they would survive and raise their as yet unhatched young, and they knew they couldn't do it without each other. Hello fellow travelers and welcome back. Today we will be doing something a little different. That being covering a species that hasn't officially been named yet. Nicknamed the Cedar Dragon. This species in particular is known from only a handful of remains, found in the Cedar Mountain Formation of Utah, of which was only recently published about in a 2025 paper. Now most of this info comes from another paleo content YouTuber called Vividen. There's a link to his channel in the description, and I strongly recommend watching his video as I'll only be giving the main points, as not to copy his video word for word. Also, if you are watching this, hi Mr. The Vividen, big fan of your work. While mostly known from teeth, a vertebra, and a rib, it has been identified as belonging to the Carcharodontosauridae family, with Neoveneta being seen as the best allegory for what it may have been built like. Now of course everyone wants to know how large it was, and well, scaling off of such scant remains isn't exactly pinpoint accurate, but with close relatives used to scale, different measurements have been put forward. The remains come from different sized individuals. These could have been different growth stages of the same species, or potentially different species of Carcharodontosaurs altogether. But once again, barely any remains and all that. The sizes range from 3.5 meters for the smallest ones, a vertebra scaled to an animal between 8.8 and 9.8 meters long, and the largest, based off a rib, gets to between 11.4 and 11.8 meters long, weighing between 4.8 and 5.3 tons. These remains completely shake up how the ecosystem of the Cedar Mountain Formation is viewed. Some of you may remember me asking why this region seems to be so dominated by dromaeosaurs and troodontids, with there being Geminiraptor, Yugovocea, and Utahraptor, all being different sizes and filling in different niches. Now we can see that it was not in fact, and we've merely been missing the area's resident massive top-order carnivore, filled by this Carcharodontosaur, which is little surprise given they were dominant large theropods for most of the Cretaceous and on most continents. What's surprising is how relatively quickly they were able to get to such sizes. The oldest known member of the family, that being, however that is pronounced, from Tanzania, lived in the late Jurassic and around 150 million years ago, and while being about 8 meters long, only weighed around 1.6 tons. In about 15 million years, this genus in North America basically tripled in size, if the calculations are correct of course. Even if there was only one large Carcharodontosaur species in this region, it still knocks Utahraptor off its podium as the area's largest carnivore, placing it as the most likely candidate to be hunting down the sauropods that lived in this region. Cedarosaurus, the largest known, was about 13 meters long and weighed about 10 tons, using reasonable estimates, which if that was the average size of an adult, wouldn't put it outside of the size range to be attacked by one of the Cedar Dragons. Of course, there were also iguanodonts and nodosaurs to hunt as well, but Utahraptor may not have been the sauropod slayer that some have depicted it as. It may have indeed been the resident medium-sized predator, which is crazy to consider a half-ton of raptor medium-sized. This certainly doesn't answer if they worked in packs or not, though. It's just as accurate to say that the Cedar Dragons worked in packs. We just don't have enough evidence for such behavior. But don't let that discourage you from depicting or imagining these animals living in complex social groups. The wonderful thing about paleofiction is you often have a lot of freedom to add any and all behaviors and situations depending on how accurate you want to be, or what genre you are creating, whether it be documentary style like my narrative sections, or purely fiction like Jurassic Park, or absolutely insane like Dino Blade. But anyway, I'm getting off track. I hope you enjoyed the first episode for a genus with no official name. I've been wanting to write this story for a while now and finally got the opportunity to do so. I hope you can forgive the shorter facts section. Hopefully more information comes out about this genus in the near future, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Vividan. No, this isn't a collab, I just really enjoy his content. And with that, what do you think of the so-called Cedar Dragon? And for my question of the week, do you now see Utahraptor as sticking to small or medium prey, or that it could still go after sauropods on occasion? What lesser-known dinosaur would you like me to do a breakdown on next? And until then, please like, share, subscribe, and thank you for watching.